Hello everyone, this is Easy Natural English with Liam, and today I want to talk to you a bit about whether or not you need an English teacher. So this is a bit of a difficult question. The simple answer is maybe. So today I'm going to explain why I think that teachers are not needed at some levels, but can be very useful for different levels. So I think a big mistake that many students make is they want to start learning a language. And this is the same thing I did when I wanted to start learning French a long time ago. You know, a lot of us, we don't know what to do. So you think, well, I need a teacher. I must need a teacher. You know, I think this is what we do with instruments as well. You know, if we want to learn guitar, we think, well, I need a teacher. I need somebody to tell me what to do. But I think this is a mistake. I think it's too early to look for a teacher. And now I will explain why. So just like me, when I started studying French, I went to French lessons. And, you know, I paid a teacher, there was a school and we had a class with like 4 or 5, I think even sometimes 6 people in one group. And we started from very basic French, you know, and we were learning about verb conjugation. So, you know, how to change the verbs for each person and some vocabulary, things like that. And, you know, I realized quite quickly that this is a waste of money. I could teach myself these things because they're very simple. At the beginning stages, you know, for example, very beginning stage, you learn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You don't need a teacher to teach you that. You know, you can check that on the internet, especially these days. You know, maybe before you needed a book, but these days you can check any of these things on the internet quite easily. You can find an answer. Sometimes even very interesting grammar questions. You can find someone else has asked that question to the internet before and you can find an answer to that question. So yeah, basic things, you know, vocabulary, like especially simple vocabulary like book, table, etc. Of course, you don't need a teacher to tell you those things. And, you know, very basic stuff. But then even when you get into forming sentences, or just trying to understand how the language works, you still don't need a teacher at that point. And I've had students who come to me and they want to take a lesson with me, and that's great. Everybody's welcome. I'm very happy to talk to people. But sometimes when I have someone who's very, very low level, I do try to say to them that you're wasting your money. You don't need to talk to me yet. The questions you're asking me, you know, you could be finding an answer on the internet. And also, when you start, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And because at the beginning, I've talked about this in other episodes before, at the beginning, if you're trying to speak, your only option is to think in your language and try to translate into English. And it's probably going to be unnatural. It's probably going to have a lot of mistakes. So before that, and I say this a lot, at the beginning stage, you need a lot of input. You need to listen to English as much as possible, and you need to read English as much as possible, watch TV shows in English as much as possible, and just see the natural way that the English language is put together. If you don't believe me, then go and read about Stephen Krashen, particularly about his input theory. So Stephen Krashen is a famous linguist, so a famous language expert who a long time ago tried to tell people you need to study through input. But like he said at that time, you can't make much money through that. If you tell students you need to just use input, then you can't sell them anything. So a lot of teachers won't tell you this. A lot of teachers say, no, you need to practice output. You need to speak, you need to speak, you need to speak. But if you speak at the beginning, if you don't know what's correct yet, you're just going to be making a lot of mistakes. And when the teacher is then correcting you, it's really bad for our confidence. So if you take a lesson from the beginning and your teacher is correcting you at every sentence, it's going to be bad for your confidence. And then when you try to speak English, you're always going to be thinking too much because you're going to have this negative experience with speaking. So really the best thing for beginners is to just try to read English, listen to English, and at least go through some kind of basic grammar guide to speed up your learning. So I do think you can get used to grammar naturally by listening and reading, but it can speed up the process, can make it a bit faster if you just go through some kind of basic grammar guide first. I often recommend to students, if you're just starting out in English, this book, Essential Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy. I'm not sponsored by them. It's Cambridge. It would be nice to be sponsored by Cambridge. They should sponsor me because I recommend this book to a lot of people. But this is a really good book. It covers kind of all the foundation, all the basic grammar you'll need. And I think from there, then if you start trying to read books in English, start trying to listen to TV shows in English, you'll understand most of what people are saying, and then you'll just be building on that. So when should you get a teacher? I think it's good to get a teacher when you feel like you're at a point where you've been reading about the grammar, you've been reading books, you've been listening to English, you feel like you have an idea of the sound of English. You feel like you know lots of vocabulary in English, but perhaps you're a little bit unsure sometimes when to put it together, how to put it together. And that's a good time to talk to a teacher. And that's what a lot of my students, so I teach on italki. If you haven't taken a lesson with me, check the link in the description of this video or on the description of the podcast. A lot of my students are at this level. So I think a lot of my students have chosen a good time to talk to a teacher. So, a lot of my students, they have a good amount of vocabulary. They kind of know the grammar, but they need somebody to help them to point out things that they might be getting confused. Because same for me. I take Japanese lessons on italki as well. And I learn most by myself. Every day I study Japanese as much as I can. Every free moment I read in Japanese, or I watch things in Japanese, or listen to things in Japanese. And I pick up on a lot of differences in grammar and things, just by hearing things many, many times in different situations. I start to see, that piece of grammar is used in this scenario, and this piece of grammar is used in this other scenario. But there are some things that I don't pick up on when I'm listening. So sometimes, I say something to my teacher that I thought that I understood, and my teacher says to me, that's not quite natural in this situation. That word has this kind of meaning to it or something. And and then that's very useful. So when you're kind of at that point where your teacher can pick up differences in things, so maybe you think you understand, but then your teacher will say, no, maybe you need to use this way, and so there's I have a lot of moments in my Japanese lessons where I'm like, wow, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice this tiny difference in how people are using that word. So that's a really good point to get a teacher when you feel like you've had a lot of input, and then you're ready to kind of refine your English. So refine means to kind of perfect, to make it perfect, to get to the next step. So, like little problems with pronunciation, little problems with grammar. Perhaps you have some vocabulary, you're not quite sure. When do I use this word? When do I use this word? You can ask your teacher. Of course, these things too, like differences in vocabulary, sometimes you can search them on the internet. But I think it's easier to talk to a teacher about those things because the internet might have an explanation, but the internet doesn't know if you have understood or not. Same if you watch a video. that person doesn't know if you have understood or not. Whereas, for example, when students ask me a question, I explain it to them, then I can test them and I can say, okay, now in this situation, which word should you use? Which grammar should you use? And then I can check that the student has completely understood the difference. So yeah, that's when teachers can be useful. So yeah, to summarize, so in conclusion, I do think, of course, teachers can help you to learn a language, but I think a lot of students are paying for teachers when they don't need to yet, or perhaps they don't need to as regularly. The really important thing to do is to study as much as possible by yourself. And this is something I've seen with my students. When I have students who take 1 or 2 lessons a week and they do a lot of study by themselves, every lesson I can see they've got better. And I have had students before who don't do much study by themselves, and every week when I see them, I see that their progress is much slower, because if you're paying for English every time, then maybe you're doing 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, because more than 3 hours a week, more than 3 hours a week English lessons would be very expensive. So that's a maximum of 3 hours study a week. That's not really enough. So if you study by yourself, it's free and you can study as much as you want. You can spend all day on YouTube watching videos. You can spend all day on Netflix watching things in English or reading books or something, listening to podcasts. And that stuff is free. So try and do as much of that as possible. And then just go to a teacher when you feel like you really need that extra bit of help. And yeah, hopefully you'll choose me as a teacher. So like I said, there is a link from my profile, my teaching profile, in the description of the video and on the description of the podcast. If you come over there, you can join me, take a lesson. Also, if this is your first time on YouTube, then don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. If you're listening to the podcast, don't forget to follow and review on websites where you can do that. And come over to Patreon if you'd like to support my channel. There's a link for that in the same place as my teacher profile. And I actually just added a new podcast on there as well. So there's an extra podcast that only Patreon subscribers can listen to. So come over there if you want to hear the new podcast. So anyway, thank you all very much for today, and I'll see you all back here next time.